Okay, today I'm going to talk about supply side economics. Supply side economics is denigrated by most and it's hated by politicians, but it makes the most sense for an economic system. Politicians hate supply side because it doesn't promote deficit spending. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. First, I'm going to remove my face. Okay, before we get started, I should say that this is a pet peeve video, meaning that you don't really need to know this to be your own financial advisor. But it is interesting, and the more you know about economics, the better off you are. Okay, supply side economics recognizes that people react to incentives and disincentives. Supply side focuses on removing disincentive from companies and employees. It's important to understand two basic equations. Salary minus tax equals after-tax salary. What are we concerned with? It's not salary. We are concerned with after-tax salary. That's what we get to spend. So when you get your paycheck, you look at your paycheck. I'm not talking about the other deductions. I'm talking about the tax deduction. I would even throw in CPP contributions and employment insurance contributions. So tax and CPP contributions and employment insurance contributions. You know, we're concerned with what we get after those are taken off. And from a company standpoint, revenue minus cost equals pre-tax profit minus tax equals after-tax profit. Just like an individual, a company is concerned with after-tax profit and not necessarily revenue. Of course, they look at revenue. They want revenue to be growing because they know that flows down to after-tax profit. It's just like salary. We want a raise because we know that does flow down to after-tax salary. Okay, supply-side economics says much but has two broad tenets. There is an optimal tax rate that maximizes government revenue. You know, if the tax rate is below or above that rate, that reduces government revenue. Now, this is an important concept, and the way to view this is there are rates where if we go higher, you know, the government pushes the rate from 45 to 50%. This actually results in a reduction of government revenue because people respond to incentives and disincentives. And number two, there is an optimal regulatory regime that maximizes the purpose of the regulation and does the least harm to the economy. So these are the two tenets, and I'm going to get into them. Okay, tenet number one. There is a tax rate or a tax structure that maximizes government revenue. Now, think of a flat tax. But this works in a progressive tax environment as well. And in a progressive tax environment, you have to look at the rates at the upper end of the spectrum. Those are the ones that matter when it comes to harming or helping an economy. Now, at a rate or rates lower, I say rates here because it's not a flat tax, it's a rate regime, like a progressive tax regime. A rate or rates lower or higher reduces government revenue. This is intuitive. You know, a lot of people think, well, hey, wait a minute. If the government raises tax rates, how can that result in lower revenue? Well, it can, and it is intuitive. And, you know, I'll start with this example. If the government says, hey, we want fewer smokers in our society, what do? They raise tax on a pack of cigarettes. The cost to cigarettes goes up. Therefore, people say, you know what? I'm going to demand fewer cigarettes. I might quit smoking because it's too expensive to smoke. Same with alcohol. If government wants fewer drinkers in society, what do? They raise the tax on alcohol. Same with carbon. If government wants less pollution, what do? They implement a carbon tax. You know, it gets more expensive to drive, so more and more people will drive less and less. Should income be different? You know, think about what is tax on income. You have a salary that you pay income tax on that, and you have an after-tax salary. What is tax? It's the cost to earning income. As that cost goes up, are you going to demand more income or less income? You know, in other words, your boss comes to you and says, hey, we've got a new project for you. It's going to result in you working not 50 hours a week anymore, but 70 hours a week. And for this, we are going to pay you a big bonus. Well, you might say, you know what? I like the big bonus, but I'm in such a high tax bracket that my after-tax is not nearly as big as the pre-tax. And my after-tax income boost to work isn't sufficient enough for me to give up the 20 hours of leisure. We are all balancing between work and leisure. And the higher the cost of work, the more we are going to demand leisure. You know, the back of envelope project calculation. Here's these equations again. You know, look at it from a company standpoint. Revenue minus cost equals pre-tax profit minus tax equals after-tax profit. So let's say a company is, or an individual is considering starting a company, or a company is considering investing in a new project. Well, they kind of do this back of envelope calculation. They say, look, you know, if we start this project, we think we can get this much revenue. We think our cost will be this much, and therefore we're going to have a pre-tax profit. Our tax will be this much, and therefore we're going to have this after-tax profit. Well, if tax goes up, after-tax profit goes down. As this number goes down, fewer and fewer projects pass the cost-benefit analysis. They fail the cost-benefit analysis and don't get implemented. Now think about this. What happens? If these guys go ahead with this project, well, chances are they're hiring a few employees. If these guys don't go through with that project, well, those employees won't be hired. So it's the same with salary. It's a little harder to see, but I'll give you an example. Let's say you have 10 people and they're all 62 years of age and they're all earning a big salary. But because they're 62 years of age, they're at least in the back of their mind, they have some thought towards retirement. Well, if the government comes along and says, look, we're taxing you at 50% now, we're going to raise that to 70%. Well, I think a few of these 10 will say, you know what, I'm going to push up retirement. It's not worth it for me to keep on working. My after-tax salary has just gone down. And that is another notion that I should put in here, is that economics happens on the margin. In my example of 10 people, you don't need all 10 people to alter their behavior because of an incentive or a disincentive. You just need a few of the 10 to alter their behavior to an incentive or a disincentive. So back to the 62-year-old and the tax rates go up. So the government says, hey, from these 10 people, if we raise tax rates, we're going to get this much revenue. See, they don't figure that people will alter their behavior. Now, if 2 or 3 push up retirement, well, that blows the whole equation. They're getting higher governmental revenue from 7 and substantially less from the 2 or 3 who altered their behavior. Okay, so I want to show you the Laffer Curve. This kind of makes it make intuitive sense. This is called the Laffer Curve, based from what Arthur Laffer wrote on a napkin when he was advising President Reagan. Okay, so here we have government revenue, and here we have tax rates. So this is increasing tax rates along this line. This is 100%, and this is 0%. Well, we know a few points here. We know that at a 0% tax rate, government revenue is 0. Now that's pretty darn intuitive. This one is pretty darn intuitive too. At a 100% tax rate, we are saying that government revenue is 0. This is probably wrong. You know, a few people would still continue to work. But let's say you work in a factory and you make $300 a day. And at 5 o'clock as you're walking out of the factory, there's a government agent there saying, hey, we're the tax man. Give us the $300. Give us all of it. Well, if that's the case, do you show up to work tomorrow? Probably not. At least most people won't. Some might. Now, this is Arthur Laffer. A lot of people think he invented supply-side economics. It's not true. The notion has been around forever. There's some ancient Arab prince who said, in the beginning, dynasties flourish with low tax rates and have great tax revenue. In the end, dynasties collapse from high tax rates and low tax revenue. It's the same concept. Okay, so that was tenet number 1. Let's have a look at tenet number 2. There is an optimal regulatory regime that maximizes the purpose of the regulation and does the least harm to the economy. Over-regulation harms the economy. Under-regulation potentially harms society. So there must be a balance here. Now, I will say this is a little off topic, but we are over-represented by lawyers in our political system. Lawyers are trained to regulate. Lawyers tend to think that the solution to problems is regulation, and this leads to over-regulation. And the best way to look at regulation is regulation equals cost. So we go down to this equation. This is a business. Who's being regulated? I guess both employees and businesses, but we'll just look at businesses. Well, whenever a piece of regulation comes out that affects a business, cost goes up. So after-tax profit is going down if cost is going up. There was the funny example is there was in Toronto, some city councillor had the idea that, we have a bathroom problem in Toronto. What we're going to do is we're going to mandate that all restaurants open up their bathrooms to the public, whether they're in the restaurant or not in the restaurant. It got shot down quickly, but how stupid would that have been? What would have that done? There's a regulation. I guess it's taking care of of some sort of bathroom problem that we may have, but what does it do to the restaurant? They would need a full-time person to clean the bathroom every half hour. So cost would shoot up, pre-tax profit would go down, and after-tax profit would go down. So here's an example of regulation equaling cost. Regulation equals cost. Look at in Alberta. They're trying to get their oil to market. They want to build a pipeline. And the government response to that is, well, we have to do a environmental study. And the retort to that is, well, we've already done 53. Do we really need a 54th? I mean, it's just ridiculous at this point. Look at the cost of doing all those studies. Look at the cost of the delay of building the pipeline. Regulation equals cost. Now, you know what? I forgot something. I want to go back here. Okay, what is the optimal tax rate? There is some research that suggests that in a flat tax, it is between 20 and 25%, and closer to 20 than 25%. Okay, it's a little harder to come up with that number in a progressive tax structure, but it's a heck of a lot lower than we're at now. And this number is movable. In times of war, the example that's used often is that in Stalingrad, the citizens of Stalingrad worked 18 hours a day for a loaf of bread and did so happily because their city was under attack and they were producing the goods necessary to prevent that city from falling. So the point being that there isn't one hard, fast rate, but in times of peace and potential good times, it's suggested to be around 20 to 25% and closer to 20. Okay, supply side economics, some unfair criticisms. Actually, you know what? I'm going to get into the data. Okay, I want to show some data. Reagan slashed taxes. He got into office in 1981. His inauguration was January 1981. 1982, I don't know what happened. He implemented tax cuts. I think they took effect in 83. Okay, so what happened to governmental revenue? Well, there was a fall there from 618 to 601. 84, 666, 85, 734, 86, 769, 87, 854, 88, 909. Tell me that his slashing of tax rates didn't result in greater governmental revenue. That's the data. You can find this data all over the place. And it's not just US data. You can find it in other societies as well. Some unfair criticisms of supply side. Supply side economics results in deficits and debt. All supply side economics provides is a roadmap to maximize government revenue and economic output. It claims little about government spending. If government spends more than revenue and incurs debt, that is on spending. That is not on supply side economics. Supply side economics is trickle down economics. Well, this is true, but I've got bad news for everybody. Wealth trickles down from the wealthy, the talented, and the hardworking. But the wealthy, the talented, and the hardworking capture the wealth in any economic system. With supply side, at least something trickles down. You know, the wealthy in Venezuela probably aren't doing so bad right now, but the non-wealthy are starving. Okay, supply side economics creates booming economies, but the gains are not equally shared. This is kind of similar to above. But, here's the big but. It is important to note that employees have the most power in a booming, low unemployment economy. Employees have the most negotiating power in a booming, low unemployment economy. There's not too many employees right now dusting off their resumes. And if they're changing jobs, they are changing for a pretty big wage gain. I want to address this as well, the fatal flaw in Keynesian economics. Keynes kind of made sense, but he didn't take human nature into account. Keynes said, hey, look, in the bad times, the government should spend money. They should operate a deficit and build up some debt. But in the good times, they should have a budget surplus that is used to pay down the debt incurred in the bad times. The problem with this is that it seems we're always in bad times because we're never paying down the debt. I think Trudeau, I'm doing this at Christmas 2019. Trudeau has run a series of deficits, and he's not alone, and most politicians do. All they do is run a series of deficits, and the debt never gets paid down. The problem with John Maynard Keynes is he may have thought politicians were more noble and courageous than they actually are. Okay, so that's a quick and dirty summary of supply-side economics. Brief overview, there's two tenets. The tax rate matters. There is an optimal tax rate. Most economies in the world are beyond that tax rate, and they could actually increase government revenue by cutting tax rates. We sure could in Canada. Our top marginal tax rate is 52% in Ontario. And regulation matters. Cutting regulation is good for the economy. Now, there's a balance to be made between society and the economy, but we so easily become over-regulated. Regulation equals cost, and no politician, when they are promoting a new regulation, will talk about its cost. Anyway, thank you for watching.